The LA Riots and the Reginald Denny Attack. True crime documentary. The sound of breaking glass filled the air as Reginald Denny's truck slowed at the intersection of Florence and Normandy. It was April 29, 1992, and the streets of South Central Los Angeles were boiling with anger. Only minutes earlier, the verdict had been announced that the 4 LAPD officers accused of beating Rodney King had been found not guilty. Now the city was exploding. Flames rose from nearby stores, people were running in every direction, and the air was thick with smoke, fear, and rage. Denny didn't know he was driving into one of the most dangerous intersections in America at that moment. He was just a working man trying to make a delivery. But the second his truck rolled into the crowd, people began shouting, pointing, and throwing objects. One man hurled a rock that smashed into the windshield. Denny tried to speed up, but his truck had already become a target. The mob swarmed the vehicle, shaking it, striking it, and pulling open the door. Within seconds, Reginald Denny was dragged out onto the asphalt. And then it happened, the moment the world would never forget. As Denny lay surrounded by the crowd, one attacker picked up a brick the size of a small loaf of bread. He lifted it high over his head. Then he tried to move, but he was already too weak. The crowd screamed. The man threw the brick straight at Denny's head. Everything went silent. The brick hit with a force that made even people in the crowd pull back. Denny's body went limp. His head fell to the pavement. Blood began to spread across the ground. And as the crowd roared, cameras from a nearby news helicopter captured every second of it live. Millions of people would see it on television. The whole country would watch in shock.
But what happened next would change the entire story and save Denny's life. Before the mob could finish him, 4 strangers rushed into the intersection. They were not police. They were not firefighters. They were ordinary men from the neighborhood who could not watch another second of violence. One of them, a truck driver named Bobby Green, pushed through the crowd, shouting for people to move. He lifted Denny's broken body off the ground while the others helped pull him back into the truck. But the mob was not done. People threw bottles and rocks at him as Bobby climbed into the driver's seat. He hit the gas. The truck rolled forward, swerving through broken glass and smoke as the crowd chased after them. Denny was fading. His blood was pooling on the floor. Bobby shouted for him to stay awake, but Denny's eyes kept closing. His breathing was shallow. His face was swelling. He had fractures across his skull, and Bobby didn't know if they would make it out alive. The fires around them were getting bigger. Sirens were screaming in the distance. More crowds were gathering on every corner. Bobby knew that if he didn't get Denny to a hospital fast, he would die. He pushed the truck harder and harder. But then, just 1 block away, a wall of flames blocked the street. The path forward was gone. Smoke poured into the air, thick and black. The truck brakes screeched. Bobby tried to turn, but the crowd was gathering behind them again, shouting and running toward the truck. He looked over at Reginald Denny's unconscious body.
There was only one way out, but taking it could get them both killed. Bobby stared at the wall of fire blocking the street. The flames stretched from one building to the other, turning the road into a giant burning tunnel. Heat blasted through the cracked truck windshield. Behind him, the crowd was growing again, shouting, throwing bottles and running closer. He had seconds to choose a direction, left or right. Both streets were dark, filled with smoke, and just as dangerous as the one behind him. But he had no choice. Reginald Denny was dying. Bobby turned the wheel hard and drove down a narrow side street. The truck bounced over debris, broken glass, torn up metal, and pieces of burning wood. At every corner, people were running, looting stores, dragging boxes, and smashing windows. The smoke was so thick that Bobby could barely see more than a few feet ahead. He kept shouting at Denny, begging him to stay alive, but Denny didn't answer. His head hung to the side, and blood dripped onto the truck floor. The city felt like it had turned into a war zone. Every radio station was broadcasting emergency alerts. Helicopters were circling overhead, filming the chaos. The LAPD was overwhelmed and retreating from many areas. Firefighters were trapped, trying to save buildings with no police protection. and Bobby was driving right through the center of it all. He reached another intersection, slammed the brakes, and looked straight ahead. A crowd was gathered in the middle of the street, lifting boxes out of a smashed truck. If Bobby drove through, they might attack him. If he turned around, he would run into the people chasing him from behind. He took a deep breath and pressed the horn over and over, hoping they would move. Some turned to look, others didn't care. A few stepped in front of the truck and stared at him, trying to figure out if he was a target.
Then one man pointed at the passenger door and shouted, "He's hurt!" More people turned. Some stepped closer to look inside. Bobby tensed up, preparing to fight his way out if he had to. But something unexpected happened. One person shouted, "Let him through!" Another yelled, "He saved that guy! Move out the way!" Slowly, the crowd began to break apart. Hands pushed others aside. People waved Bobby forward. For a moment, the chaos paused long enough for him to squeeze the truck through the opening. Once he was clear, Bobby stepped on the gas again, feeling his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He didn't know how much time they had left. Denny's breathing was getting weaker. His face was swollen, almost unrecognizable. Blood covered his shirt. Every bump in the road made his body tremble. Bobby knew that brain injuries were deadly, and the blow from the brick had been strong enough to kill most people. He prayed under his breath for every second they stayed alive. Finally, after turning corner after corner, the fires and crowds started to thin out. The streets became quieter. Then, Bobby saw a sign glowing through the smoke. A hospital. It was only 2 blocks away. He pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to reach it before Denny stopped breathing completely. But as the truck approached the hospital entrance, Bobby saw a line of police cruisers blocking the driveway. Armed officers were standing guard, directing traffic away. The hospital was overwhelmed. Too many injured people had arrived in too little time. The police were turning cars around, refusing entry, trying to stop the building from being overrun. Bobby leaned out the window and shouted, "He's dying! He needs help now!" One officer stepped forward and put his hand up, telling Bobby to stop. "I'm sorry," the officer yelled back. "The ER is full. We can't take anyone else."
Bobby's heart dropped. Denny didn't have minutes left. He barely had seconds. The officer walked closer, ready to force Bobby to turn away. But when he looked inside the truck and saw Denny's broken face, he froze. Something changed in his expression. He stepped back. He shouted to another officer. Doctors began rushing toward the truck, but just as they opened the passenger door, Denny's body stopped moving. He wasn't breathing. The doctors pulled Reginald Denny from the truck and rushed him toward the emergency room doors. His face was swollen, his breathing had stopped, and his pulse was fading. Bobby stood frozen beside the truck, watching helplessly as the medical team worked. The night around him still burned with chaos, sirens, and shouting. But in that moment, all he could hear was the rapid orders being shouted by the doctors trying to save Denny's life. Inside the ER hallway, doctors placed an oxygen mask on Denny and pushed a tube down his throat to help him breathe. Nurses placed IV lines in both of his arms. A machine beeped rapidly as they checked his heart rhythm. His skull had multiple fractures. He was bleeding inside his brain. His face had been hit so hard that one eye was swollen completely shut. The chances of survival were low, and everyone in the room knew it. But they kept fighting.
A doctor pressed down on Denny's chest, counting each push. Another squeezed an oxygen bag. A third doctor scanned his head for signs of brain damage. The room buzzed with fast movements and tense voices. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Bobby paced back and forth outside the ER door, his hands shaking from shock. He had risked his life to save a stranger. Now, all he could do was wait. Finally, a nurse stepped out. "Are you the one who brought him here?" she asked. Bobby nodded. She gave a small, tired smile. "He's breathing again. It's weak, but he's holding on." For the first time that night, Bobby felt his knees go weak. He leaned against the wall and let out a long breath he didn't know he had been holding. The city outside was tearing itself apart. But in that hospital room, something had gone right. A man everyone thought was dead had a chance to live. Hours later, police arrived to question Bobby about what had happened. The attack on Denny had been recorded live by news helicopters. Millions had watched it on TV. People across the country were shocked not only by the violence, but by the bravery of the men who rescued him. Bobby told the officers everything he saw: the crowd, the brick, the chaos, and the desperate drive through burning streets. As he spoke, his voice cracked, but he kept going. The truth needed to be heard. Meanwhile, doctors continued to fight for Denny's life. Days passed. The riots spread to other parts of Los Angeles. Buildings burned, businesses were destroyed, people were injured, and the city struggled to keep control. But in a quiet hospital room, Reginald Denny slowly began to wake up. His recovery was painful. He had trouble speaking, he had to relearn how to walk. But he was alive. And when he learned about the men who had saved him, he asked to meet them. When Bobby walked into the room, Denny reached out his hand with tears in his eyes. No words were needed. The handshake said everything. The city of Los Angeles would later look back on that night with heartbreak. The violence had left a deep scar. Many families lost homes, jobs, and loved ones. But the story of Reginald Denny became a symbol of something different. Not just the danger and fear, but the courage of ordinary people who stepped in when no one else would. Years later, Denny would speak publicly about forgiveness. He refused to live his life filled with anger. It wasn't an easy path, but it was the one he chose. And the four men who saved him, Bobby Green, Titus Murphy, Terry Barnett, and Leigh Ewell, were honored for their bravery. The LA riots were one of the darkest chapters in American history. But even in the darkest moments, some people still chose to save a life, even when it meant risking their own. Thank you for watching today's true crime documentary. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us which real crime story you want us to cover next.